Our great pleasure introducing to you our guest from Mozambique, Professor Carlos Nuno Castel-Branco. Professor Castel-Branco has been attending at our invitation a short course that the Nyerere Resource Center, or as we call it in Kiswahili, Kawazi la Mwalimu Nyerere, has organized. This was a 5-day course on financialization of land and ecology. It was a full-time course with 25 participants, among whom we had young lecturers from universities, some young intellectuals, and also people active in various our civil society organizations. And Professor gave us 3 lectures laying the theoretical basis of the current phase of the international capitalist economy and how our countries fit into this scenario. Professor has an interesting history behind him. At the age of 15, he directed the adult literacy program of Frelimo. From 1977, when he was 17 years old, he was a member of the Mozambican People's Liberation Army, which was armed wing of Frelimo. And of course, all of us know Frelimo, because Frelimo was based in Dar es Salaam, supported very closely by Mwalimu Nyerere. After that, he founded and became the first director of Institute for Social and Economic Studies. And I had the honor to visit this institute in 2009. It's really an excellent institute doing basic research, much more than consultancy reports, which we are used to. He also is an associate professor at the University of Eduardo Mondlane. You know Eduardo Mondlane was the first leader of Frelimo, and Mondlane was assassinated actually in Dar es Salaam. And he's also the associate professor in Lisbon School of Economics and Management. So we had this great privilege to host a professor at this training course at NRC. Professor, in your last lecture, which was fascinating, you talk about the public debt in Mozambique and compared it with the debt or the crisis of Greece and tried to situate that in what you call the financialization of this phase of capitalism. I would like us to discuss more on the issue of public debt because it's so relevant to all our countries. We also have been grappling here in Tanzania with the rising public debt. The last count, it had almost become 40% of our gross domestic product, and it keeps rising. Now, what does this mean for our countries? If you could give us some background for the public debt in Mozambique, and how do you see it? How do you see this?
Thank you. First of all, before answering your question directly, I'd like to say how grateful I am to have been invited to this course and the very incredibly good debates that we had, and how they are stimulating not only intellectually, academically, but also politically, because you can see the strength of the intellect and action that goes into the desire for economic, social, and political transformation, and that always feeds supports the efforts that we try to make, to concentrate for that purpose. So thank you very much for the invitation. Okay, going straight into your question now. Debt is not necessarily a problem. Debt can be a process, that can be a resource actually, that can be used by the economies to create new opportunities. Actually, capitalism is built on credit and debt. That it's necessary for advancement of production, innovation, and so on. The question is, in recent times, over the last couple of decades, capitalism has been accumulating, capitalism has been growing in terms of financial transactions, and not necessarily in terms of jobs, production, so real accumulation. And debt has been used as a business more than an advancement in the possibilities of developing production, innovation, employment, wealth, real wealth that can be shared by producers. In the particular case of Mozambique, Mozambique had a deep economic crisis back in the 1980s, and as a result, we engaged in a stabilization program with the IMF, and for 25 years, the Mozambican government wasn't allowed to contract debt, commercial debt. We had concessional debt dominatingly, and which is debt that is contracted with the IMF, with the World Bank, and with other multilateral agencies in very concessional terms. So it means that interest rates are very low, the maturity periods are very long, there are grace periods during which you don't pay back the capital and so on. So this is very concessional debt. In order to put it in simple terms, is cheap debt. Now, the beginning of this century, so from 2005 onwards, commercial debt in Mozambique started to rise. First was the domestic debt. Domestic debt was all of it commercial. And what was the domestic debt about? There was a part of it related with the unpredictability of aid. Aid was a dominant source of income to finance investment, public investment. So the unpredictability of aid created short-term cash flow problems that led the government to incur in short-term commercial debt in the domestic market. But increasingly, the domestic market was starting to be used to finance the expansionary public expenditure. And so the domestic financial debt grew fast from 2% of, from a very low levels, it's 2% of the debt stock to about 14–16% of debt stock. But the domestic debt is all commercial and very expensive, because in order to sell the debt to the financial system, to attract resources for the government, the interest on domestic debt are very high. So there are two implications there. One is that a small proportion of the debt stock is very expensive, and so represents a very large proportion of the debt service. And the second problem is that because interests are so high relative to to the potential returns on other investments that banks may make, banks started to be more and more attracted by the debt of the government, and government debt became the single most important business of the banks. They yield higher returns than any other business in the country. So when we look now at the structure of bank portfolios in Mozambique, we see about 30% of these is negotiation of debt bonds. So the claims on future government revenue that government has sold in order to raise money to finance the deficit. And about 25–26% is luxury consumption goods, household consumption that is mostly dominated by luxury housing and so on. So that has fueled a speculative bubble in real estate. And then you have about 20–25% is trade. So industry, agriculture, fishing, and so transport and communication and so on have been squeezed out of the activities of the commercial banks. Of course, it has a big implication. Yes, you create wealth, but it's fictitious wealth. Is wealth in the hands of banks speculating on government bonds. Then that wealth is converted into luxury consumption, and so it doesn't result in expansion of the productive capacity and employment and development of real wages in the economy. So this is one of the implications. Right. But from 2010, there is a new dimension of commercial debt, and that dimension was a very, very fast increase of external commercial debt. So the IMF relaxed its controls on government contracting external commercial debt. And there was a big, very large debt space that had been created. What is the debt space? The debt space is what is considered to be the space for sustainable debt, so debt that can be paid without significant sacrifices in the economy. So we didn't for 25 years contract external commercial debt, but GDP grew. So the space between the proportion of GDP that can be contracted as debt has a very significant value. So if the sustainability rate is fixed at 40% of GDP, so we say the commercial external debt is still sustainable as long as it doesn't go beyond 40% of GDP. Over the 25 years I mentioned, GDP grew 7 times. So that space also grew 7 times. So 40% of a very large GDP is a lot of money. So the government considered that space as a kind of a mine. Is a mine of gold or a mine of any other strategic resource. In one mine, you make a hole in the wall and you extract the resource. In the debt space, the space is there, the wall is there. You can fill it with debt. So it was like mining the debt space, taking away the emptiness that is there and filling it with debt. And why was it happening? It wasn't happening for the purpose of broadening the basis of production and employment and development, but it was, when we look at the structure of that debt, it was very focused on promoting the minerals and energy complex and other very large commodity production for exports, primary commodity production for exports. What was the role played by that process in promoting the extractive economy? It was first to build infrastructures for the mining and energy industries and for the general commodity production. Second, it was to build services for the same activities. And those infrastructures and services are not available for the economy as a whole. They are available for those sectors. And together, these infrastructures and services represent about 62–63% of the expenditure that justifies the increasing external commercial debt. Then there is another factor, which is the government gave guarantees to private debt. And those guarantees represent roughly 25% of the debt stock. So we have here a situation in which about 88% of all the debt stock is actually associated with a very small number of firms and activities concentrated on minerals, energy, and commodities to export that employ a very small number of people, employ roughly 25 to 30,000 people, represent the bulk of GDP growth. About 75–80% of GDP growth comes from these sectors, represent the bulk of exports. About 95% of exports comes from these sectors, and represent the bulk of private investment in Mozambique. About 90% of all private investment goes into these sectors. So the government used the debt space to promote a system of accumulation, particularly focused on this mining and energy and other commodities, which didn't have a significant multiplier effect to the rest of the economy, didn't create jobs in a significant number, didn't develop linkages in significant number to the rest of the economy. And the other element of this is that the dynamics of that debt also stimulated a real estate bubble and a speculative financial system. So the question is not only whether we can pay or not. Now we can't, because debt is now more than 100% of GDP. So the question is not only whether we can pay or not. The question is, what is the impact of that process of development, the application of resources and so on the structures of accumulation that emerge in the economy, and what are the impact of such structures on well-being, on welfare, on the possibilities of people benefiting from growth. So this is the question about debt. It's not only how much debt, it's not only whether you can fiscally pay for it or not, is the overall implication in the dynamics of accumulation. So now we have a speculative process of accumulation and a very narrow process of real accumulation. And these two together create the conditions for very fast growth up to a certain point without poverty reduction, without job creation, and so on. And recently, because of the fast accumulation of debt, the bubble exploded. So Mozambique moved very quickly in a matter of months, a few months, from being a country, an economy where the international financial markets looked for in this region, to becoming a rogue economy nobody wants to touch. Yeah. And this is the danger when we look at the issue of debt, saying, oh, we are still within the parameters, we still can pay it financially, and so on. Because we need to remember two things. First, the ability to pay debt is politically defined. Because what we mean when we say we can pay debt, it means that we can squeeze other areas of the society and the economy to pay debt.
Right.
That's what we are saying, basically. So when we say 40% of GDP is fine, we can pay the debt. We are within the parameters. It means that we don't mind sacrificing education, health, roads, sanitation, broad-based development, financing of development of cooperatives in the rural areas, and so on, because we don't mind, because we have other priorities. For example, gold or oil or gas, and we are incurring in debt in order to finance those sectors, and we don't mind squeezing the the social capacities for labor and economic reproduction, or the capacities to create a broad-based development in order to pay for that. So we are defining priorities in the economy. We are defining in the economy priorities of who is going to win and who is going to pay for those that win. So we are doing that. The second point is that exactly because of that, debt, as any other form of creation of resources or mobilization of resources and deployment in the economy, structures systems of accumulation, structures of accumulation, dynamics and relations of accumulation. And in doing that, we need to look at where are we going. It's not enough to say we are going fast is fine. Because if we are going fast in the wrong direction, we are getting very, very fast there to the wrong destiny.
Right, right.
So fast is not the answer. The answer is which direction are we going?
Right.
And these are the two big lessons, I would say, from the Mozambican debt problem.
What you said, Professor, has a lot of resonance in Tanzania, although we are not quite there. Because as I said, if you go by GDP, our debt is about 40% of GDP. And it has been rising though. And you have pointed out three trends which you also notice in Tanzania. First, increasing commercial debt, private debt. If you look at domestic debt in Tanzania, 51% is from commercial banks, private commercial banks, holding through government bonds, treasury bonds, and so on. And the second point that you have been mentioning, which I think is very important, while debt in itself is not a problem, okay, because much of the capitalist economy actually runs on credit. The question is, where is this debt going? Is it going into producing, or is it going into speculating? And I was just looking at the figures in Tanzania. 30% of the debt, it goes into minerals and energy. 31% into infrastructure. And I think you pointed out very well that this infrastructure is also connected with minerals and energy. I wish we had similar figures for Tanzania. 20% goes into balance of payments and budget support. You see? Because that support is indirectly connected with repaying debt. Sure. Okay? Only 5% goes into agriculture. Only 5% goes into industry. Only 5% goes into education. So the debt that we are incurring doesn't go into productive sector. It goes into enclaves, okay, where the foreign investment is concentrated. 95% of foreign direct investment in Tanzania is in mining. Almost 39 to 40% of exports is gold. Okay. It has overtaken agriculture and commodities. Okay. So you find that we are sort of reinforcing in a new form the kind of export enclave that we used to during colonial time. Exactly. You know? But worse still, it seems to me, without using very strong terms, that we are becoming a kind of enslaved to debt, because creditors, like Shylocks, that insist on their pound of flesh. And we are not able to pay debt, they will be prepared to give you more money to pay the debt. Currently, some figures that I saw in the newspaper, our debt repayment, debt servicing, has almost become 75% of our revenue collection. Now what does that mean? As you pointed out, and this is sometimes not seen, the connection, that if you are to repay your debt at that level, which means you have to starve other sectors, very important sectors, okay? Education, health, sanitation, so as to be able to pay debt. Another very important point, I think, and that is so crucial for us, because we have been talking a lot in Tanzania. We have been told that the economy is growing, most consistent over the last 10 years, over 7%. And people keep asking, economy is growing, but how come we are becoming poorer? I mean, this is put in simple terms, but it starkly represents the reality. Economy is growing, we are becoming poorer, and we are becoming more and more jobless. Unemployment is increasing. Again, if you look at the figures, you find that the enclave, where much of the investment goes, where much of the debt goes, mining sector, employs very few people. At the moment in Tanzania, roughly, the people employed in the mining sector is half or less than half of people employed in domestic service. I mean, domestic service employs more people than the mining sector. Okay. And even the industries employ much less. At the moment, our industry employs less people than it used to employ by the time Nyerere retired. And this is an expanding economy. This is a growing economy. So you have the famous jobless growth. Okay? So growth sounds very hollow to the people, and people questioning. And I think there's a limit to how far it can be rationalized and justified. And the point is that, yes, look, if we do not repay our debts, we will not be credible. Okay? People will not advance loans to us. So it becomes kind of vicious circle.